Since people tend to spend most of their time talking about the best or their favorite scenes, I thought it could be fun to put a spotlight on the underrated, overlooked, or underappreciated scenes throughout Game of Thrones. At number 15, we have the dialogue scene between Brynden Tully and Jaime Lannister. The overall siege of Riverrun was kind of unremarkable in the grand scheme of things, but at least we got this legendary pairing. It dredges up an interesting point of past conflict, and this leads to such quippy and clever lines of dialogue. Like Brynden asking Jaime if he wants to resume his capture.
Do you wish to resume your captivity?
I see this scene as the Blackfish's last great scene, and it's kind of akin to a verbal battle instead of the physical one that we were utterly robbed of. It's well acted, has a great setting, I love the blocking and how Brynden subtly establishes dominance over Jaime, and it hosts a surprisingly great line from Season 6.
Bargaining with Oathbreakers is like building on quicksand.
The war is over, sir.
Number 14. Roose Bolton's story of having Ramsay. Roose Bolton is an interesting character in which we basically go this entire time without ever really learning anything about his past. That's why I'm drawn to this dialogue scene, because it goes into this insane moment in his past where he hangs this wife's husband and then forcibly has sex with her under his hanging corpse. It's such a morbid story that even Ramsay of all characters seems disturbed by it. Before this, it seemed more like the terrible things he's done was only to push his house forward, but it turns out that behind the scenes, he's just as evil. Season 5 as a whole isn't really known for any great dialogue, so this is why this scene stood out to me. Number 13. Melisandre discovering that Beric has been resurrected 6 times. Most people in relation to this setting will probably point to Arya's 2 scenes where she wants Gendry to be her family, or ask Thoros to resurrect her decapitated father as being better. But I feel that also kind of disqualifies those scenes from being underrated as they are well known. This scene, however, is more overlooked and perfectly highlights Thoros and is really one of the only scenes where he gets vulnerable and emotional, along with delving into his past as a pessimistic priest who is imbued with this swaggering confidence after he realizes that the Lord of Light is real through him resurrecting Beric. This scene takes a character that was kind of goofy and drastically energizes him with this immense weight that is so magnetizing. Number 12. Maester Pycelle and Ross's scene. You may think I'm trolling a little bit with this pick, but I think this scene is secretly brilliant. It simultaneously sets up historical context through Pycelle's monologue about past kings, and it also subtly shows that there's more to Pycelle's character. He portrays himself as this decrepit, rambling buffoon to Ross, but the second she leaves, he springs up with energy and seems completely normal, only to revert back to being an old husk before leaving his room. It rewards viewers for paying attention and single-handedly takes a surface-level character and gives him a bit of depth in a well-written fashion. Number 11. Myrcella's death scene. This is kind of hard to judge because I feel like this scene is recognized as being good. However, it has the massive baggage of being attached to the worst subplot in the entire show. Just off of that alone, I classify the death of Myrcella as being overlooked because this is a great scene. It's extremely heartbreaking because just when Jaime achieves this euphoria of Myrcella realizing that he's her dad, she dies in his arms. It operates as this narrative rug pull that makes this plot beat land even harder as a tragedy. And even before this, the bonding between these two characters is quite essential because they've had practically no screen time together before this. So the creators need to efficiently build a lovable dynamic within like 2 minutes before it explodes in front of our eyes. Number 10. Jaime and Catelyn's first dialogue scene. On retrospect, this scene slaps and has so many consistently great and iconic lines.
You look lovely tonight, Lady Stark. Widowhood becomes you, if your gods are real, and if they're just. Why is the world so full of injustice?
I feel like some of the Jaime prisoner scenes kind of blended together for me, but most of them were great, and this one especially stood out to me the most. The insults are at their best, Jaime challenges Kat's faith, and I love how blunt Jaime is in regards to Bran. It's really interesting seeing Jaime lean so hard into his Kingslayer persona, and of all the character arcs, I think Jaime has one of the best. Number 9. Sansa's dialogue scene with Lysa Arryn. This is a terrifying scene. Sansa just escaped King's Landing, and the second we think she's in a safe environment, she's actually in just as much danger in the Vale. I love how they communicate this progressively through the scene. It starts out normal, where Sansa is disarmed via Lysa offering her lemon cakes, and then she slowly starts asking more and more suspicious questions. This ramps up to the point of Lysa going mental on Sansa, driving her to a point of breaking down and being on the verge of tears, only to revert back to being friendly once she figures out that Sansa doesn't love Peter. It shows Lysa as actually being a villain, and I love how even family members can be antagonists. The acting as well is great, especially for Sophie Turner, who I felt had some rough moments in the earlier seasons, but this really proves that she has talent. Number 8. Cersei and Sansa's dialogue after her flowering. When recalling the best dialogue scenes in Season 2 of King's Landing, all of them are probably Tyrion Lannister related, but this one I feel is a hidden gem because it treats Cersei with this raw honesty as she attempts to give Sansa some good wisdom in regards to her future with Joffrey. It's simultaneously deep in meaning while also acting as a great thesis for Cersei as a character. She reveals so much about herself to Sansa and what drives her, along with also talking about the past to a great extent. There's a lot of conflict and past trauma strewn across Lena Headey's face as she recalls her history with Robert and Joffrey. This is a great Cersei scene that is most likely forgotten or overlooked because Sansa in earlier seasons was rather unlikable. Number 7. Littlefinger threatening Ross. This is in relation to Joffrey killing all the Baratheon bastards, and Littlefinger coming in to whip Ross into shape. I think this is another well-regarded scene, but I'd argue that this surpasses the good title and is actually great. I love the progression here in which Littlefinger starts out warm and gentle, and he slowly twists this dagger into Ross's side and threatens her with this terrifying subtle hostility. It simultaneously paints Littlefinger as this unnerving sociopath, while also going into his past, where he alludes to what motivates him. One other thing here is that the editing and cinematography conveys this feeling of escalating claustrophobia. We start in these wider shots, and then we cut to these extremely tight close-ups where Littlefinger is suffocating Ross in the frame. Very underrated in my opinion, and it's just a perfect Littlefinger scene. Number 6. Talyssa's story that seduces Robb Stark. I kind of have a weak spot for the blissful scenes in Game of Thrones. They act as a great counterbalance given the wider tragic story overtones, and these warmer moments offer a delightful euphoric catharsis. Talyssa's story of her brother drowning and witnessing a slave save him, knowing it was against the rules and that's why she decided to drop everything and become a nurse, was so moving. This paired with arguably one of Ramin Djawadi's best songs called I Am Hers, She Is Mine, drastically increases the emotional impact of this scene. Also, this is 5 straight minutes of pure dialogue, and it's so fucking riveting. The acting is entrancing, and the way the scene is paced keeps you engaged. This overall dialogue scene is mostly well regarded to my knowledge, but to me personally, I come to watch this scene if I want to feel something. And there may also be a negative stigma towards it, as it's a major departure from the books. Number 5. Jaime and Ned's meeting by the Iron Throne. I feel like for Season 1, everyone generally points to Littlefinger and Varys' dialogue scenes as being the standout duo scenes, along with Robert and Cersei's scene, but I'd say Ned and Jaime's scene rivals their quality and can even be argued to be better. I in general love the overarching themes of knighthood and honor throughout Game of Thrones, as George R. R. Martin challenges those themes in creative and devious ways. And this scene was fundamentally a great clash to explore those themes. It's chocked full of so many great lines with fun subtle jabs and insults. The tension between these two characters is insane. This scene also naturally sets up future conflict and even builds the given characters at hand, like addressing Jaime's past. It provides a lot of substance for the overall narrative in a short time, and it's surprising to me that this scene is relatively overlooked. Number 4. Jaime and Edmure's negotiation. This was surprisingly really good for a Season 6 scene, as this was mostly when David and Dan abandoned the notion of writing compelling and riveting dialogue scenes. However, here, the exchange between these two characters is charged with so much emotion. They're trying to crack each other, like Edmure genuinely asking Jaime if he thinks he's a decent person, which is an interesting and thought-provoking question, and seeing Jaime melt back into his Kingslayer persona and threaten to catapult Edmure's baby into Riverrun was just flooring. The acting here is magnificent, and I'd argue this is Nikolaj's best scene since his bath scene in season 3. And even Tobias, I think, is able to hold his ground as well, acting-wise. Also, even from a larger story perspective, this is how you properly solve the conflict of a siege in an exciting and clever way. Not teleporting into Highgarden as if Olenna was sitting in an unguarded farmhouse in bumfuck nowhere. Number 3. Theon revealing that Bran and Rickon are alive to Sansa. The Season 5 subplot of Sansa being sent to Winterfell was absolutely horrid, but within that grave of a subplot, there was one shiny ring left on the corpse, which is this scene. It has this great emotional catharsis that's built up brilliantly by Sansa grilling and laying into Theon, and then he unravels all of this rage with the news of Bran and Rickon still being out there. It's also acted incredibly by especially Alfie Allen, who portrays this rich and detailed nuance as his inner identities of Theon and Reek are crashing and imploding. It's ripping him apart until he finally unleashes an ounce of truth before being terrified and reverting back to Reek. Then, a few other things that I loved were the lighting and how the Winterfell theme comes in during the Bran and Rickon reveal. It's definitely a scene in which it feels like the plot beat and the acting is carrying the quality, but it's surprisingly still well written for Season 5 standards, and those standards are buried in the ground. Number 2. Samwell and Aemon's scene before the battle at Castle Black. Considering that battles tend to overshadow the entire episode they're in, I thought Samwell and Aemon talking before their coming doom definitely deserves more attention. And I think this is also more overlooked than the other pre-battle dialogue scenes. Similar to Talissa telling Robb her story, this scene is also bursting with warm, blissful energy. Aemon's story about his first love and recounting that he can still distinctly see her face after all this time is wholly engrossing and just makes me want to hug him. And hey, guess what? I Am Hers and She Is Mine also plays in this scene, and at this point, I feel like Ramin Djawadi is exploiting one of my weaknesses. This is also just the perfect scene, as I pointed out earlier, in which it counterbalances the tragic upcoming events with something warm and sincere, while also synergizing this episode with an overall background theme of love that punctually and brilliantly explodes in the ending with the death of Ygritte. And to somehow elevate this scene even higher, the ending line is perfect and is one of my favorite lines in Game of Thrones.
Nothing makes the past a sweeter place to visit than the prospect of imminent death.
Number 1. Catelyn and Talissa's dialogue scene. This is the literal definition of an underrated scene, as it hosts two characters that were relatively unpopular or weren't that well liked. This is a riveting journey of emotional turmoil that's ingrained with this somberful layer of melancholy and regret. Catelyn addresses the festering stain of her past, in which she wished Jon Snow would die as a child, and then he coincidentally got mortally sick and almost passed away. Because of this, she thinks all this tragedy befallen onto her family is because she couldn't love this motherless child. And as we progress through this scene, the acting and music swell into this euphoric climax that completely floors you. This scene takes an aspect of her past and fully explores it in a personal and emotionally devastating way. And this also happens to kind of relate to Talissa in that she's this awkward black sheep that represents a loved one forsaking their vow. The synergy here is subtly brilliant, and this is easily an incredible scene that drastically increases Catelyn's quality as a character. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments what your favorite underrated scene is. My Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and if you didn't know, there is the benefit of being able to vote on Game of Thrones videos for one of my Patreon tiers. Hey! We got a new top patron named Simply Put. Thank you so much for supporting me, and also thank you to my longtime supporter, Logan Farmer.